Good afternoon and welcome to the regular meeting of the Board of Estimate and Taxation for April 26, 2023. I'm Samantha Priestinson. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the president of the BET. At this time, I will ask the clerk to call the roll so we may verify the presence of a quorum.
Board Member Fry is absent. Board Member Abeni.
Present.
Board Member Jenkins is absent. Board Member Koski.
Present.
Vice President Brand.
Present.
President Priestinson.
Present.
There are 4 members present.
Let the record reflect that we have a quorum and we will now proceed to our agenda, a copy of which has been posted for public access to the city's Legislative Information Management System, which is available at lims.minneapolismn.gov. Next, we move to, board members, we move to the agenda for today. It is before us. May I please have a motion to adopt the agenda? Is there a second? We have a proper motion before us. Is there any discussion? Any discussion? Seeing none, with that, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. The ayes have it, and the agenda is adopted. Moving to the acceptance of our minutes from the April 12th, 2023 meeting. May I please have a motion to accept the minutes? Is there a second? We have a proper motion before us. Any discussion? Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Any opposed say nay. The ayes have it, and the minutes are accepted as presented. Item 4 is our public comment. We don't have any public comment for today, and it doesn't look like we have anybody present here for public comment, so we will move on. But as a reminder, we do allow for 10 minutes total, which would be 2 minutes a speaker, but we don't have any for today, so we will move right along to item 5 on our agenda, which is the 2023 assessment report presented by our city assessor, Ms. Rebecca Malmquist. Thank you for being with us today.
So thank you, President Priestinson and board members, for providing us this time to share with you some of the highlights of the 2023 assessment. I'm Rebecca Malmquist, and I have the honor and privilege of serving as the city assessor, leading a team of 38 in the classification and valuation of all properties in the city, ensuring fair and equitable valuation, which translates to fair and equitable taxation. I want to thank our staff for helping create and contribute to this report. I would point out I do have one of my team members with me, Ben Nelson, the Manager of Assessment Services.
We'll take a small pause just to acknowledge that Mayor Fry and Council President Jenkins have joined us. Good afternoon. Please proceed. Thank you.
First, a high-level summary and reminders about the assessment. In February, we completed the January 2nd, 2023 assessment of estimated market values for approximately 131,000 properties, and this is an annual process as is dictated in statute. The notices of valuation, commonly known as value notices, were mailed, and we have been working through the local Board of Appeal and Equalization process through the past few weeks. It is important to remind everyone that the 2023 assessed market values are used to calculate next year's 2024 taxes. We value properties in 1 year, and then the budget and the levy are set and taxes are payable the following year. We know this can be confusing because property tax statements are mailed at approximately the same time as value notices. So the payable 2023 property tax statements that property owners received this year, those were used calculating last year's 2022 market values. Another reminder is that the data we use to set the annual assessment is also dictated by statute. For the January 2nd, 2023 assessment, we analyzed market-based sales transactions that occurred between October of 2021 and September of 2022. In Minnesota, property taxes provide a significant portion of the funding for local government. Every property's share of taxes is based on its market value, its use, and local government budgets, which then become the tax rate. You can see in the image on the screen for a simplified illustration. Market value is the price a property would sell for in the open market, and our role as the assessor is to reflect the real estate market and set fair and accurate market values by following market trends. We also classify property. A property is classified according to its use. Different uses of property, even if they have the same value, pay different taxes because they have different class rates that are set by the state legislature, and we'll provide an example in just a moment. And then the tax rate, and that's the amount that's determined by using the budgets of the local government, such as here at the city, the county, school districts, watersheds, etc. So the intermediary step in converting value to tax is called the tax capacity. And this slide illustrates how this works for some of the common property types in the city. The calculation for tax capacity is the market value, which is in the second column, multiplied by the class rate in the third column. For example, as you can see here, residential property on the first line and a commercial industrial property on the bottom line, if they're both assessed at $300,000, will still pay different taxes, and that's because the class rate for a residential property is 1%, and the class rate for a commercial industrial property is 2%. As a result, a residential property will pay approximately half the property taxes of a commercial property. I must note that this is a very simple model or illustration, but there are more complex factors that go into these calculations, like the homestead program, state general tax, and fiscal disparities. This slide is a historical view of the city's total estimated market value. The overall estimated market value from 2022 to 2023 increased by 4.2% this year to just over $67 billion. This does not, however, include utilities and state assessed properties because those values are not yet available. This does include new construction for permit work this year that did total just over $1 billion. This slide is a visualization of the breakdown of the three major property type categories by the 2023 market value on the left and the tax capacity on the right. Because of the calculation of the value to tax that we discussed on the previous slide, there is a change in the distribution between the three categories when we move from estimated market value on the left to net tax capacity on the right. You can see here that the residential values in green on the left comprise nearly 60% of the total estimated market value. However, when the class rates are applied, the residential portion of tax capacity reduces to just over 50%. You can see that the commercial value in blue comprises almost 20% in market value, but when class rates are applied is about 30%. This chart is a historical view of the tax capacity as a percentage of the total tax capacity by property type. So if we compare 2022 to 2023, the two bars to the furthest right, you can see the year-to-year shift between commercial, apartment, and residential will be very minimal this year. Overall, this means that residential and commercial will bear about the same burden in payable 2024 as they did in 2023. I would also like to note that because of the historical growth of the apartment market, both the residential and commercial properties have a smaller portion of the burden than was true just 10 years ago. You can see illustrated in orange going all the way back to 2024. The apartment properties comprise just under 13% of the total capacity, and they now comprise about almost 20%. This slide is the distribution of the assessed market value across the city by ward. So the larger the size of the pie, the greater the percentage of the total market value of the city. It is then broken down into the three major property types. So you'll see that in downtown, it comprises more apartment commercial value, and when you move further away from downtown, residential will be the primary property type. This slide illustrates the change in market value by ward. Each ward is represented by a blue bar, and the percent of increase is a label at the top of each bar. So last year, while wards 4 and 5 saw the greatest increases in market value, this year Ward 13 saw the largest overall increase of 8.5%. This is a historical look at the total residential value growth. And this is including condominiums, townhomes, duplex, triplex, everything all in here. And so this year, the market value for residential increased by 3.4%. And this does mark the 11th straight year in a row of residential increases here in the city. While the previous slide illustrates the overall value increase, this slide further breaks it down into the three major residential property types. We grouped condominium and townhome, we grouped duplex and triplex, and then the single-family detached is categorized separately. Overall, there were increases in the duplex and the triplex and single-family submarkets and a decrease in the condominium market. While last year, the condominium market also saw decreases, those were really driven last year by the large complexes in downtown and uptown. But this year, the distribution of the decreases in the condominium market were much more equally distributed across the city. I would point out that there was $260 million in new construction in the residential market. So on to how we are measured by the state. Our assessment is very closely scrutinized by the state to ensure both accuracy and equity. We follow requirements mandated by the state, which are based on the International Association of Assessing Officers standard on ratio studies and standard on mass appraisal. This data reflects the residential market. The analysis is of properties that have sold, so we can compare our assessed values to what they're selling for to analyze how accurate and equitable the values are in comparison to sale prices. The first measurement I will review is a sales ratio, which is the third column. This is a measure of the level of assessment. It is a comparison of the estimated market value to the sale price of a property. Simply stated, it's the assessed value divided by the sale price. We use the median ratio as the measure of central tendency. So looking at the bottom row of the nearly 5,700 sales in the city this year on the residential market, the median ratio is 95.5%. An acceptable median ratio is 90 to 105%. However, to be consistent with our surrounding jurisdictions, we all typically aim for a median of 95. We don't want to be at a significantly different level of assessment than our surrounding neighbors in the suburbs or surrounding counties. We don't want to be at a median of 95 when, for example, if Edina was valuing properties at 90% of market value. And we do have conversations with our partners, colleagues across the borders in different cities and the counties to ensure this consistency. The second measurement is the coefficient of dispersion in the second to the last column, and this is the measure of uniformity of our assessment. It measures essentially how far away from 95.5% each of the other sales is. An acceptable range is less than 15% for a city like Minneapolis, and we meet this requirement. The last measurement, the price-related differential, is critically important as well because it measures the vertical equity of the assessment. So, when low-valued properties are valued at a greater percentage of market value than high-valued properties, the assessment would be considered regressive. When low-valued properties are valued at a lower percentage than high-valued properties, the assessment is considered progressive. But assessments for tax purposes should be neither progressive or regressive, and our assessment is within the acceptable range of this statistic. Just want to quickly highlight this slide, which is the historical look at all of those statistical measures, just to indicate in the past few years that our COD has been improving, the median sales ratio has been fairly consistent, and as had the PRD. This slide illustrates the comparison of the median sale price, which is in blue, to the median estimated market value, which we determine, which is in orange. These lines should be going in the same direction and should be close together so that you can see that this measurement is also improving. Our median estimated market value this year grew about 4.4%, and this year is at $329,000. If we break down the market value changes into groupings by how much they changed, you'll see indicated by the green and the orange bars that nearly 2/3 of all of our residential properties saw an increase up to 10%. This is a map of the single-family residential changes by parcel and by ward. And so this year, which was different than some of the previous years, the growth was more equally distributed across the city, as in some previous years we've seen more growth in wards 4 and 5. The next slide is a look at the aggregate growth in each of the neighborhoods. So if you add up all the residential properties in each of the neighborhoods, this is what we were seeing across the city. And again, the growth was much more evenly distributed instead of being in one geographical area. And I think that we can skip past that one. We have talked about it a little bit already, and I can pivot over now to the commercial industrial market. So separating commercial from industrial, you'll see overall increases in both markets in the last column. However, the industrial market saw a much more significant increase this year of 23.6% compared to the commercial market increase of 3.8%. This is the second straight year of double-digit growth in the industrial market, and it is the largest growth of any one property type in the city. However, this is not unique to Minneapolis, and we're seeing this in the surrounding suburbs and counties as well. The growth in the industrial market continues across the region. This is a historical look at the commercial industrial market values. While we saw an overall decrease in 2021, this is the second straight year of growth in the commercial industrial market. The aggregate EMV of $13.2 billion has now exceeded the pre-pandemic high of $12.8 billion. So while overall the commercial industrial market is trending up again, not every geographical submarket has completely rebounded. This slide separates out the downtown and uptown submarkets on the left, the two furthest to the left, the commercial market outside of downtown and uptown, and then the industrial market. So you can see here that we're still seeing overall value decreases in the downtown market. If we look quickly at the statistics as we did for residential, you'll see that the median ratio and the COD is acceptable, and the PRD is slightly out of range, and this will be watched for the next assessment years. Going over to the apartment market, the net increase this year was 3%. There was still over $605 million in new construction added this year. And again, the statistical measurements for the sales ratio and COD are acceptable, and the PRD is out of range, so that will continue to be on our own watch list, as well as the state's. So as I mentioned before, value notices were mailed in March. They are color-coded to align with Hennepin County's initiative to align a value notice with the truth in taxation notice with the tax statement. So this year's value notice is in yellow. So in November, the truth in taxation notice will be in yellow, and the tax statement in pay 2024 will be in yellow. That's and trying to connect one with the other because it is so confusing with them being mailed at the same time. So since the Local Board of Appeal and Equalization adjourned at about 4:10 last night, the remaining option for those that wish to appeal is through the Minnesota Tax Court. And for the 2023 assessment, the deadline to appeal with the Minnesota Tax Court would be April 30th of 2024. I did just want to highlight some of the tools that we have on our website that our team has been working on. We have property info in the top left. On the bottom left, we have created a neighborhood sales finder, and through the local board hearings that we've been going through the past few weeks, we have found that there are a number of our property owners that are using that tool. They're bringing those sales in when they come in to present their appeals to us, so it's great to see it's actually being used. On the bottom right is another data point dashboard that we've created that is neighborhood by neighborhood, so that you can see where the growth or decreases have been by neighborhood, going back, I believe, to like 2012. And then the top right is the levy impact estimator that our team created, by our team, I should say, Ben, created last year that helped in the levy setting process for the mayor's office. And I believe that concludes, I did already highlight this. The next step in the appeals process for all of those that were on the local board agenda is the County Board of Appeal and Equalization. They will convene on June 12th. And while it is the County Board of Equalization, and there are members selected by the commissioners, our staff does continue to work on those cases and will present those reports as well. And just for a little bit of information, so you know that where our residential team will be headed this summer, in the next few weeks, actually, all the neighborhoods in pink, we will be visiting, going door to door. Our teams typically go through the field. Our entire residential team of 12 or 14 are going through the neighborhoods together, and we will notify your offices, or the ward offices, as well as communications, to make sure that people know who those people are that have green vests on that are walking around their homes. And with that, President Priestinson, that concludes my report.
Thank you so much for that work and the creation of that tool. Amazing work. Are there questions? Vice President Brandt.
Stan, are you under time pressure today to get to the park board?
I was, but the park board was gracious enough to let us move that out 2 weeks. And so
Okay.
that presentation,
Okay.
I was a little stressed about getting from here to there
I
in time.
understand. Therefore, I won't be quite as terse as I would have been otherwise. But I want to, first of all, congratulate your office again on the development of the levy impact estimator. For me as a policymaker, that's been a really invaluable tool. One of the things I've been paying close attention to over the last several years is the apartment construction figure that you report. And it has been a very significant growth area for the city tax base, almost $2.8 billion on a tax base of $67.5 billion. The most recent figure is in the ballpark, but is a little less than the three previous years, and I'm wondering what your crystal ball tells you about whether the apartment construction market is slowing down at all. I bring this up because there was a lot of angst in the public policy debate of a couple years ago about the impact of the 2040 plan in terms of stepping toward density, and I understand some of that, but I believe that increasing density was generally appropriate, especially for the high-density corridors that like the one near me where I'm seeing it. One particular parcel I check on is a former drive-in restaurant going back to the late 40s, and then it became a sit-down restaurant, and it was valued at $760,000, and then eventually was sold for $1 million, and now holds a $10 million apartment building. And that kind of growth is, I think, really important to the city's tax base, particularly right now when we saw that blip in commercial property, which we seem to be recovering from everywhere but downtown. So is apartment construction starting to slow down, or is this just an accident of timing that we're down to just over $600 million? And then secondly, what impact would a hard rental cap, in your opinion, have on the pace of apartment construction? Rental cap, yes.
President Priestinson and Vice President Brandt. Unfortunately, my crystal ball's in the shop. It was really blurry, and so I don't have that to leverage tonight. However, I would just say that it also depends where in the project each apartment project is at, because we do value what is there as of January 2nd. And I don't have the figures about how many are like partially constructed right now. I know that we did come up with a partial construction figure overall. Do you remember what the number was?
There's an estimated $300 million of uncompleted value in projects that are in construction.
Yes. And then as far as the rent stabilization work, we did do some estimates and some work with finance and property services and CPED and regulatory services and the attorney's office. And it's a wait and see. We have talked to our colleagues in St. Paul, and they're not seeing any movement right now. And so I would say that I would advise you to go back and watch the presentation to Biz last week, and that would probably help answer some of your questions.
And when you say not much movement in St. Paul, do you mean not much activity in terms of new construction?
Not necessarily, in new construction, but also in sales transactions. We're not
Okay.
seeing any sales transactions really over 50 units.
Commissioner Ben? Okay. If you want to speak to what Vice President Brand said, and then I'll circle back to you, Commissioner Benny, does that sound good? Okay, Mayor Fry?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and my apologies, Commissioner, for sort of jumping you in line there. But I wanted to discuss this particular topic briefly and at least cite some of the approximate numbers that I have in my head. Before I do so, I do want to really thank you for all of your work, Assessor. It's invaluable for the city. The work that your department does in the city is critical and makes a huge difference for policymakers. And so thank you for your work generally. Thank you for the levy impact estimator. I think it's a really useful tool and certainly helps policymakers make good decisions. To Vice President Brandt's question around rental caps, a couple pieces I want to point out. First, there was a recent Pew Research, PEW research analysis that was conducted nationwide regarding affordability of rental costs and supply of housing. And due to the increases in supply that we have seen in Minneapolis, we have seen among major cities the lowest rent increases of any major city in the country. At least that's the way that the graph was portrayed. I'm happy to send that chart around. It's a pretty extensive piece. Now, that's not to say that there aren't anecdotal instances within the city where the rent goes dramatically above that. But again, the work that we are doing and the strategy that we have taken, not according to me, but according to Pew Research, is working. And not just working a little bit, working better than just about anywhere else. And again, not my words. You can look at the data, and it'll paint that picture very clearly. Next, we have seen some pretty substantial growth, as you know, over the last several years in apartments. That apartment growth has allowed us to offset the cost that would otherwise go to the rest of the city. There's one particular parcel that I'm thinking of where the previous property taxes generated from what was largely a vacant lot were around $35,000 per year. And with a large building on it, the property taxes generated were over $2 million. Those $2 million, while they could increase and will increase the levy likely, the levy percentage increase, the impact to each individual property taxpayer due to that increase of property tax capacity has gone down. And then finally, the question as to how have rent caps or rent control impacted the city, or what would be the impact. While I can't predict the future, and we also can't 100% determine causation, the last year or so since St. Paul instituted their ballot initiative and then their rent cap itself, they saw approximately, and you shouldn't quote me on this because but these numbers are an estimate, they saw about a 65% drop in their development, whereas we saw a 90+% increase. So 65% drop in one city, a 90% or so increase in the other. Again, I think those percentages are an estimate, but I think I'm pretty close in terms of the numbers. Now, those numbers, we can't say that it's 100% causally connected, but the juxtaposition is real, and we can't ignore it.
Thank you, Mayor Fry. Commissioner Benny?
Thank you. Thank you so much for the presentation. I find this just really personally kind of really interesting. So I apologize, some of my questions are going to probably be a little bit maybe dumb, I don't know. But, you know, one of the things I wrote is, when you were giving the presentation, is how you look at the neighboring communities. But actually what the mayor just said is really interesting to me from a point of view of, yeah, if you don't look at what the neighboring communities are doing in terms of where they are with the properties, you can have people vote with their feet, potentially, or invest somewhere else. So, one of the things that also comes to mind is that under the residential category, it's the combination of condos, townhouses, single-family, duplex, triplex. And I don't know, one of the things that I've been wondering with all of the building up we're getting of rentals, at some point, if there would be a conversion to condominiums, if there's some change in the way that portfolio is viewed, or that investment opportunity, is that something that's a concern? Because there is a difference in the rate, I think, for those.
President Priest-Stinson and board member, yes, there are plenty of conversations going on about the conversion to condominiums, especially in the downtown area. You know, I've only had the opportunity to be in the business since 1997, but I mean, we've had a couple of cycles where we have seen that conversion of apartment to condominiums. For example, I think now we'll probably see something more like commercial
Yes.
condominiums, when the floor plates work, when the size of the buildings work, and things like that.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
It's just interesting for me to consider that. And then one more question, and this is almost just really personal, but there was a term that you used in the presentation, and I've seen it on my bill, my own property tax bill, and I had an understanding of what it was from years ago, but the term is fiscal disparities. And I thought it had like a kind of a county-wide or a region-wide role, but it's usually zeroed out. But could you describe what fiscal disparities means, at least from the point of your presentation?
From the point of my presentation,
Yeah.
we don't really get into it
Okay.
really at all. Fiscal disparities really is applied across the state.
The state.
And I would be happy to get into it, but I don't want to mess up all the details. And I looked back at Deshani because she's probably our in-house expert about this. Otherwise, I'd be happy to get back to you
Okay.
and provide some like bullet points, and explain it.
Yeah, my understanding is it had to do with some way that to fund money out of the center of the metro area out to the outlying communities, but it's not really happening anymore, but okay. Right.
Like a redistribution.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
I had just a quick question around, so when new construction happens, like let's take a condominium, for example, it's something that somebody can own. It's covered, and anything that breaks, I believe it's like a 10-year period. So sometimes in some cities, and I believe it happens in ours as well, after kind of that 10-year period lapses, sometimes what was an apartment will convert to townhouses or condos in a different category, because that time period, it's better business for people in the business of that. But I'm just wondering, do you have any information on how often that happens, that apartments are kind of like a cycle when that happens? These apartments that then kind of flip into townhouses, like as a business model flip. Do we track any information like that?
President Priest-Stinson, we do have the data because we do change the classification from an apartment, and then there's actually an intermediary classification.
All right.
Because so many units of the building have to convert to condo before we can convert everybody to condo.
Got it.
So there is an intermediary step, and we would be able to pull the data, historical data, about how many units that has happened to.
Thank you.
Yes.
Vice President Brandt.
Probably a couple follow-up questions. The idea of conversions of office towers to residential use has been under discussion for really since the pandemic hit almost. Are you seeing any signs that it's actually a real thing as opposed to something that is a maybe or a what if, or is it happening?
President Priest-Stinson and Vice President Brandt, it is happening. I would say that we don't have our chief appraiser here with us who manages all of the CBD and the downtown team, but they do surveys of brokers and property owners downtown, and those conversations have definitely escalated, I would say. It takes the right building to make the model work, though. It's really about the floor plate and windows and all of those things. I'm quite sure the mayor has been contacted several times about different properties that are being considered under conversion, as there is a lot of inquiries going on with our office and administration about what's happening, what we're seeing in the downtown market. Day by day, we're just collecting more and more information because we're going to be applying that to our next assessment year.
And if I could follow up on just the number of parcels that you assess, I noticed that the last couple of years, it's up by about 6,000 from what it was in 21 and 20 assessment reports. And is that just something, a number that hadn't been updated for a while, or does it reflect additional condo units, which would, I guess, be individual parcels? I was noticing it's jumped from 125,000 to 131,000.
President Priest-Jensen and Vice President Brandt. Yes, it would be the growth of new parcels being added. Oftentimes what we're seeing is in a new development, it's not just one parcel. You know, it may have been one parcel, but then they demo it and add a new building, and and then we started counting exempts. But yes, for example, like, is it the 7 or the 11? I don't remember what it's called. 7, like 11. Thank you. Things like that. But when we do see new construction, we are seeing oftentimes that's not just one parcel; it's being split into several parcels.
Okay.
Are there any further questions? All right, well, thank you again so much for you and your team and all of your work. We greatly appreciate it. Thank you for being with us today. With that, I will ask the clerk to receive and file this item, and we move on to item number 6 on the agenda, which is receiving and presentation of our 2022 fourth quarter financial status update from our city controller, Lyle Hodges. Welcome. Thank you for being with us.
President Priest-Jensen, members of the board, thank you for having me. As you've noted, I'm Lyle Hodges, the controller in finance and property services at the city. Here to present the financial status report, summary level information about some funds at the city as of 12/31/2022. Before I get going here, I do want to note the information presented today is accurate as of 12/31/2022, but it will be different than what you see in our audited financial statements when we publish those in a couple months here at the end of June. Just through the natural course of our accounting activity, changes happen to fund balance and net position numbers that are not reflected here, but will be reflected in our audited statements. To begin with, we've got a summary overview. Again, the financial picture of the city continues to be impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. Last summer, bond rating agencies did confirm our outlook changes that they had made in 2021, and that was an increase from stable to positive from Fitch and negative to stable for S&P. We do see that parking revenues are rebounding, but they're still less than were less than budgeted and less than the pre-pandemic amounts. Building permits and local tax revenues did increase in 2022 over their 2021 amounts. The spending decisions and federal aid that we received through the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA, is allowing the city to continue programmatic spending. And as of June 2022, last summer, we did receive all of our ARPA funding, and we have spent approximately $108 million of that through the end of 2022, with the remainder scheduled to be spent by the time limit. Continuing on, our total book value of cash and investments at the end of 2022 was approximately $1.3 billion. That is an increase of $175 million from where we were at the end of 2021. We are meeting fund balance and net position reserve requirements in all of the funds of the city except for 2, and that's our self-insurance and our information technology funds. Those are both internal service funds. As far as our cash targets. We are meeting that in all but 2 funds as well. The parking fund is under that minimum cash balance, of course, due to lost revenue during the pandemic. And the sanitary sewer fund is under the minimum cash requirement due to planned spending on capital investments and using cash rather than bond funds for capital. In the general fund, we use this fund, of course, to account for all financial resources except those that are required to be accounted for or reported in a different type of fund. Our ending 2022 fund balance was $197.7 million. That's about a $54.8 million increase compared to where we were at the end of 2021. It exceeds our minimum fund balance policy, which is 17% of the subsequent year's budget, or about $97.7 million based on our 2023 budget. Originally, we had planned to spend down general fund balance in 2022. And then, of course, through our rollover process, we increased that plan to spend down, but in the end, we increased it instead. Likewise, our cash balance in the general fund increased up to about $216 million, a similar increase, about $54.5 million over where we were at the end of 2021. This slide shows budget versus actual for major revenue categories. As you can see, collectively, we collected $24.8 million more revenue than we had budgeted. That was led by overages in the licenses and permits category. This represents development activity. We also collected franchise fees in excess of the budget of almost $7 million, and that has to do with the rates that everyone is paying for things like natural gas and energy. We collect a flat rate on top of that, so as those rates go up, we collect more revenue. And then at the last category there, all other revenues, includes our investment earnings, which we saw exceed budget by about $5 million in 2022. This graph shows us comparatively how we collected revenue as a percentage of budget, and then compares that to prior year averages. So in 2022, we collected approximately 104.2% of our budgeted revenues. Historically, we do collect about 101%, so we collected slightly more than average in terms of budget to actual. The next slide is general fund expenditures, again, budget to actual for our largest departments. Here you can see collectively we underspent by about $50 million in the general fund. There's, at the top line there, the police department we can see was underspent primarily due to staffing, savings in staffing. Fire was over budget by about $4.7 million, again due to staffing. They had some overtime costs that were above what they budgeted. The last two lines represent major underspending, and the $22.8 million is primarily in the CPED fund. We moved some projects into the general fund CPED budget that we didn't really expect to spend in 2022, so that's where that underspending was from. And then this graph, similar to the revenue graph, shows us over time we do underspend in the general fund. Usually it's about a 97% of budgets on average. And last year, through 2022, we only spent about 93.7% of our budget. So we were more under budget than usual. All right, the next few slides, we will talk about fund groups of funds all at once. So the first group is the Special Revenue Fund. This is where we account for and report for the proceeds of specific revenue sources at the city. Our our big special revenue funds are listed there, Convention Center, Target Center, et cetera. At the end of 2022, these funds had a cumulative fund balance of approximately $357.7 million, a slight increase compared to where they were at the end of 2021. And then their cash balance was about $487 million, so that was a larger increase, and the reason for that increase primarily is because this is the group of funds where we account for the ARPA activity, the grant fund, where we got that prepayment. So again, we've received all the cash for that. The cash in that fund is fairly high right now to be spent over the course of the next few years. This slide shows in detail by fund both the cash balance, the cash balance and the fund balance, and then the change from 2021 to 2022. Here we can see about 2/3 of the way down there, that grant funds line. That's where our ARPA fund is reported under, so you can see the large increase in cash there. The next group of funds are our internal service fund. At the city, we've got 6 major internal service funds. They're also listed there. We use these to account for goods and services provided internally to other city funds and departments. At the end of 2022, the total net position in these funds had increased by about $17 million up to $74.4 million. And cash also increased in this fund group by about $14 million up to about $181 million. And this just reflects consistent spending, staying within budgeted amounts, and then there's been some transfers from various funds into the self-insurance fund to help support cash balances. And then here again, here are those funds listed out in detail. Again, cash balance and net position, 2021 versus 2022, and where they ended up. And then finally, we've got the enterprise funds. These are the funds that we use to account for operations where we're selling goods and services to external third parties. They include the utility funds as well as the parking fund and the CPED operations, or CPED enterprise fund. At the end of 2022, total net position in this group of funds was over $1 billion. That was $18.8 million increase from where they ended 2021. Total cash in these funds was about $105 million, which was a $2.5 million increase from 2021. And again, cash is stable in most of these funds. And we did see a slight increase in the stormwater fund, which you'll see on the next slide due to operating gains. And so this is, again, the detail by fund of each of our enterprise funds, showing the comparison between 2021 actual and 2022 actual for the end of the year.
Thank you for that. Colleagues, does anyone have questions or comments regarding this presentation? Vice President Brandt.
I was gratified to see that in the area of sanitary sewers, you have spent down some of the cash in preference to bonding. My colleagues will remember that an argument I made a year ago was sanitary sewer system in a particularly advantageous position to be able to do that, or was this done across the 3 underground utilities that the city runs? The preference, the move toward using more cash and less borrowing.
President Priestens and Vice President Brandt, I'm actually not sure of the details on that one in terms of how each of the utility funds manages their bonds as compared to cash for capital projects. I don't know if we have a general statement that would cover that, but okay. I can look into it.
And I wanted to ask, as of what's budgeted for the end of 2023, what will the remaining amount of ARPA funding available for the city in 2024 be?
President Christensen, Vice President Brandt, that's also a number I don't have available with me today, but I can certainly look that up
Thank you.
and let you know.
And the third question is, you mentioned the sort of windfall, if you will, from franchise fees because of some of the higher utility costs we've all been paying. Are we at risk are we likely if those prices for energy fall to see the franchise fees fall? Does it work the other direction as well?
President Christensen, Vice President Brandt, I believe that it would be the case that the rates themselves that we collect on those would need to be negotiated to be adjusted if the utility rates decreased.
Okay. Thank you.
Commissioner Abene.
Thank you. I just want to say that I appreciated the presentation very much, and just for the record, that the Park Board is really outside of this report, and that the Park Board did its year-end report in the last few weeks to the board. So I just wanted to note that. Also, I'm tracking, because the Park Board's working closely with the city now on an initiative to establish our own stormwater kind of enterprise fund. And so it's nice to see that there are operating gains there. It could be a great partnership there in that fund. And I was at first thinking, okay, well, there was a rate increase that was fairly significant, but that took effect in January. So I don't think that could be part of the reason why, but it was just noteworthy, and I wanted to comment on it. Thank you.
Let me turn that mic on. With seeing none, I'll ask the clerk to please receive and file that item. One quick announcement, just to keep things smooth amongst all of us. If there are requests, we do have Abdo now, which is fabulous. So please, because I manage that contract, if there's questions, reports, spreadsheets, other things, so that we respect staff's capacity and also utilize the professional services that we all voted on, please send those things to me so that they can be orderly and I can keep track of those requests, and so that we also can equally have access to the things that we're all requesting as well. But other than that, we are adjourned. We have completed all of our business before us, and have a great afternoon. Thank you.
Do you need more information about organics recycling, or have questions about how to watch a city council meeting? Minneapolis makes it easy.
How do I get more information about city services?
To get city information, you can call, text, or use the 311 app. Call 311 from a phone anywhere within Minneapolis city limits. If you are outside Minneapolis, you can call 612